In this video, I will be talking about 5 important planetary changes that happen in the month of March. It's a huge transitional month for the year. I would say the biggest astrological month of 2023. I'll tell you why. First off, my name is Nicolas Polymenakos, aka Sparkles of Gold. Thank you for stopping by the channel. Let's look at the first event we're going to talk about. Here, I have a chart for I'm making this video actually on Sunday, March 5th, and I want to bring up this chart here, which is March 2nd. March 2nd, 2:52 p.m. is when the planet Mercury enters the sign of Pisces. Now, it's been in the sign of Aquarius for the last month, a little less than that. Before it went in and changed into Pisces, it made a connection with the planet Saturn. I did a live stream on this. You can go look at the video. I'll put the link up there. I did a live stream while this change happened. And Mercury was in the sign of the scientific world, the ideas, the detached coldness of the mind, the experimentation of the mind. And it switched over into Pisces here, where we go into mutable, uncharted, boundaryless, creative waters. Mercury, the planet of communication, ideas, thoughts, and opinions, how you formulate those things, entered the sign of Pisces, the dreamy, poetic, artistic way of communicating, sometimes, a lot of times without words, using different vessels of communication to explore words, to explore ideas, to explore the expression, how it comes through oneself internally and outwardly. A lot of times you'll see this in art and music. It has no boundaries, but it can get scattered and aloof. And there's vulnerability in the words too. And that happened on March 2nd here, 2023, 2:52 p.m. Don't want to stay too long there, but just want to say that's a major shift into the spring northern hemisphere mutable way of Pisces. The birthdays are there right now. Neptune is still in Pisces. Now the way we're communicating is in dream world. Okay, the next chart I want to bring up is actually, it's the full moon that happens on March 7th. You probably might watch this during it happens. This full moon happens at 4:40 a.m. in the morning, March 2nd, on the Pacific coast. This is an interesting situation here because I'll bring up, this isn't even one of the 5 things I'm talking about, but it leads into the second important planetary change that happens this month. You could see here the moon, and I want to do this in a way where you could, right here like this. This moon is at 16 degrees Virgo, and you could see the sun is at 16 degrees Virgo. They're opposite of each other. It's an opposition. This is how a full moon works. There's a opposition. There's a little bit of tension involved. Now, the interesting thing here is in this lunation is the planet Uranus right here at 15 degrees is relating and connecting Earth with this moon in Virgo. And this adds a electrical, unpredictable change in this full moon that's based in mutable sign of Virgo, opposing a sun in Pisces, mutable. We just talked about Mercury being in Pisces right here. It's at 7 degrees at this point, and Mercury rules the moon in Virgo. Virgo's ruled by Mercury, but we also want to pay attention to something else. And it's here. It's the planet Mars that's been in Gemini since last August. It's also ruled by Mercury. It is in between squaring this here and here. We go here. That's the square. So basically, we go, Mars is squaring the moon in Virgo and also squaring the sun. So you have a lot of heady energy, mutating, changing energy. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, if we were to look at the time here, it's 4:40 a.m., right? I mentioned this. Something very important happens in less than an hour. And it has to do with this chart right here, which is actually 5:34 a.m. Pacific time. The planet Saturn finally leaves, and we'll go right there, finally leaves the sign of Aquarius, where it's been for 2.5+ years since 2020. And with this full moon happens in less than an hour, Saturn goes into Pisces for the next close to 3 years. And this is number 2 on the most important things that happen this month. We have another major shift that happens here, and it's Piscean. Saturn, the planet that deals with reconstruction, form, restriction, rebuilding, actually turning things into dust and ashes, because something needs to be rebuilt from that place, is entering the sign of Pisces. Pisces and Pisces people, if you have planets in Pisces, this is a huge one. This is a huge shift. You got almost 3 years of a major rebuilding story that happens. Saturn gets a bad rap in the astrology world. I love the dang planet. It can be harsh and cruel. It brings temporary rule sets into wherever it is. In this case, it's going to be Pisces. At this, you could see here, if I even blow, no, I'll do that again. How there's Saturn and Mercury. There's the sun. There's Neptune. Okay. And I'm not doing the best of jobs there, but there it is right there. Now, this happens again just past the full moon, and that's the second thing. I'm going to get to the third thing, but before I get to that, let me tell you something about Saturn and Pisces. I in particular think that the last 5 years, and there's other people talking about this, that Saturn was in the sign of Capricorn for 2.5 years, and then it was in the sign of Aquarius for 2.5 years. So we have 5 years of Saturn in 2 signs where it actually does well in it. It was at home in. It has certain type of crystallization and synastry with Capricorn and Aquarius. Then Saturn's entering a mutable sign like Pisces, and this to me is erratic. I think in general, Pisces can be erratic and be mutating all over the place. It will benefit eventually with having Saturn in the Pisces world. But I'll tell you, this first year and a half, I actually think it's troublesome. And I don't mean to scare anybody out there or do whatever, because I'm a Saturn astrologer. When I work with my clients, I come up with plans, fundamental plans with my clients of how they can formulate and envision of how to work with a planet like Saturn. So if your birthdays are a Pisces sun, you have planets in Pisces, or if you have any major planets between 0 and let's say 6 degrees of mutable, which is Gemini, Virgo, I'm forgetting your Pisces. So this transit right here in March, all the way to the end of this year, is going to be fundamental in your world. There's no running away from it. There's no ignoring it, because if you run away from Saturn, and if you run away and push away whatever Saturn brings into your world, it's going to double and triple itself when it comes to the compression, the depression, the limitations on you, and life predicaments and stories will be reflected through a Saturn transit of having to face major reality checks. The more you push the reality check away in the Pisces part of your chart, the harder it's going to seem. So in the beginning of transits like this, where Saturn enters in a sign, to morph and to mutate into that and get used to with a Saturnian influence, deals with delays and slowing down time. All the Pisces energy is not going to move the way it likes to usually move. Saturn's going to demand a structure and a container for the water of Pisces. Some of you are going to have a really hard time with this. I just added some Saturnian readings on my website. I also added some Pluto ones, and we'll get to that in a second. But I just wanted to look at you without the chart on the screen to get this in your head, that the adjustment period for Saturn and Pisces is huge. It happens on March 7th. You have a couple months here to get used to it, but it's going to throw some curveballs your way. Go easy on yourself. Remember, Saturn brings restriction at first, but in the end, it brings wisdom. If you work with Saturn, you will graduate. Ask any Aquarius. They just did 2.5 years of this. All right, so we're going to get to the third thing here that happens on March 16th with Venus. Venus being in the sign of Taurus. I will annotate this for you. You could see here. It goes right there. Venus in Taurus. This happens on March 16th, 2023. Venus being in Aries now, was in Aries, was moving through at the end of February into March, where Venus in Aries made connections with Jupiter in Aries, Chiron in Aries. And there's this well-known Jupiter Venus connection that happened in the sky. It was visible for 2 weeks. Venus starts to move away and enters Taurus, where finally Venus enters this palace, this organic, beautiful, sensory palace where Venus, who deals with relationships and shows herself and lives through her senses in the sign of Taurus, where she is at home. We're dealing with sensuality. We're dealing with beauty and attraction. We're dealing with base core pleasures, really. Also, too, we're dealing with money and the acquisition of resources and what possessions mean. All this stuff I just mentioned really comes back from a modern astrological view of dealing with like what one values, how they value themselves and their sense of self-worth, what they value outside of them, the other, the world, relationships, people, how it shows up. Venus here is going to come and be in the practical sign of Taurus, wanting to ground and wanting to plant its seeds to eventually harvest success, whether it's in money or in relationships, and also share in that through the senses, through pleasure. There's a tendency here sometimes to overindulge. If you're a Taurus, you know this story already in your life. If you're a Scorpio, you know this in a different way. Venus here is important here because the transit that it's going to make, in the next so many weeks after this happens, is actually connected to a series of eclipses that have been going on since 2021, which I've always been talking about here on the channel. So Venus kind of preps and eventually will hit Uranus in Taurus again, and eventually kind of pretty much sets up a Mercury retrograde that happens down the line in Taurus, and an eclipse that's going to happen in May. So I know we're in March, but now we have three ones. We have Mercury going to Pisces. We have Saturn going to Pisces. We eventually, on the March 16th, we have Venus going to Taurus. I like this transit, by the way. It's a good one. I think we're going to need it. It's going to be our little pleasure place, our little chill place, to feed ourselves. And then we get into the fourth one here. And this one I'm going to bring up is one probably many of you know about already, but it is so fundamental and so huge that it's Pluto going into Aquarius on March 23rd. It's going to happen at 5:23 a.m. Pacific. I will shrink this chart down. Yeah, Pluto here going in Aquarius. Pluto has been in the sign of Capricorn since 2008. When Pluto goes through a sign, it actually varies in its length of how long it's there. 2008 to now isn't that long for Pluto to actually be in a sign. But we're about to enter Aquarius. Pluto's entering Aquarius, so it's going to be there for 20 years. A lot longer than Pluto was in Capricorn. So we have this ingress, what we call it when a planet goes into a new sign. We call it an ingress. It happens on March 23rd. Now, for the Aquariuses out there, or anybody who's been paying attention to the Aquarius story for the last 2.5 years, we had Saturn go through there. We had Jupiter at one point and be there with Saturn, and we just finished it up. And here comes Pluto for 20 years. So the interesting part of this Pluto story, though, and it's kind of how Pluto transits work, and I'll point to Pluto here, and I hope you're digging my pink color today. I'm going to point to Pluto there. You can see the phallic symbol. Did I just put a phallic arrow point on Pluto? It kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I'll change that up in a second, but I want to point this out because of how huge this is. Because of a lot of times we can see a Pluto story not just reflected in our lives at certain points, because Pluto works in the subconscious level. It's such a slow moving planet when we deal in the astrology world, and how long it takes to go through a sign. Like I mentioned, it varies, but we're dealing with power in all its ways of how power manifests and forms, like power over others, power over ourselves, reclaiming power, losing power. We're talking about intensity. We're talking about Pluto, a planet that deals with what's buried underneath things. Things that are buried will eventually come up to the surface. This is what Pluto's does. Its function is that way. It's just a lot of times it's hiding behind the scenes. From a more modern perspective, we're dealing with the subconscious. But if we are going to take modern perspective and even psychological perspective and other modalities involved, we a lot of times can see this subconscious story that we carry, the Pluto story, how we carry it within our families, lineage, community, the world, and the subconscious manifests outwardly, consciously in the world through world events, through certain storylines, through fundamental structures. Pluto likes to come in and pretty much break down those structures. So now, if it's doing that, and the devastation that it brings, because I'm not trying to use hard words, but I just got to get this reality into you. For any Capricorn out there who knows, who's had Pluto in the world since 2008, you know what I mean by devastation or the regeneration that's occurred. And it's not easy. It brings up all types of stuff that is rotting and poisonous. Pluto's story brings it up to the surface and puts it out there. And it's a long process. You're still not done, my Capricorns. I think you're not going to be done for the next couple of years, to be honest, of like processing what the hell happened to you, you know. But basically, you're being reborn, or you've been reborn. Now Pluto's going to do this in the Aquarius part of your chart, and for the Aquariuses. If we deal on a mundane level, if we think about what Aquarius is, we're thinking about what is rational, the abstract. We're also dealing with the community-based way of being. In a sense, the Aquarian ideal is one is to separate themselves from what is normal and find their individuation. Okay? And once they find their individuation, they walk that path to finding one's true self. That's different from the way everybody else does it. It's part of the process. They're standing in the normal line. A lot of people are standing in a normal line, and the Aquarius energy just can't do it anymore. It will branch off and tangentially rebel against the normal line through what is normally considered the way to do things, to find their way of doing things, to find their way of who they are, their to be an individual. But the other part of it on a group level is this humane, community-based oriented way of being, that if we're our individual selves, we get to step into community, be our individual selves, and everybody's doing the same, right? That is the utopian ideal. But it doesn't really work that way, does it? We get moments of that. So besides all that, an Aquarius dealing with innovation, things that are new, things that are progressive, group-minded ways of taking action, group-minded thought, Pluto is about to come in here and destroy some of it, those parts that do not work anymore. A lot of times you're going to see this through technology. We're already seeing it right now, whether we're dealing with AI, we're dealing with the future ideas, how we do things as collective level, for better or worse. This is the story. I'm going to do another video on this, but I just wanted to look at you and tell you, especially you Aquariuses out there and any other fixed sign, you're a Taurus, you're a Scorpio, you're a Leo, Aquarius. If you have planets in those signs, or a rising sign or a sun that is in the beginning parts, let's say 0 to 5, you have something unavoidable coming your way, something intense, something that deals with the shadow of who you are and the shadow of your sign. And we're in for a huge, fundamental world change here the next 20 years, or I think we're really going to see it within the next 6 months. That is the fourth thing that happens on March 23rd. Thanks for hanging with me and doing this. The second thing, or the last one I'm going to bring up, is at other times maybe not be that's such of a big thing, but it has to do with Mars going into the sign of Cancer. This is a couple days after Pluto enters Capricorn. Mars enters the sign of Cancer on March 25th, 4:45 a.m. All this stuff's happening early morning on the West Coast, but and I will show you. Let me annotate this for you all. And where is Mars? There we go, right there. And so we could see there's Cancer and there's Mars there, enters there. Why is this important? The reason is because, as some of you well know, Mars has been in the sign of Gemini since last August. It went retrograde in October of last year. Came out of retrograde in January this year. It's for Mars to be in a sign, it's like 7 months is huge. Mars doesn't normally do that. It takes a bunch of years for it to do this retrograde process. But it's been in this mutable sign of Gemini, and it's finally going to leave at the end of the month. Mercury goes into Pisces beginning of the month. March 7th, Saturn goes into Pisces. March 16th, Venus goes into Taurus. Remember, we have a full moon in the middle of this. I didn't even bring up on March 20th, the equinox. We have a new moon that's going to happen at 0 degrees Aries. That's for another video. March 23rd, Pluto goes into Aquarius. March 25th, Mars goes into Cancer after being in the heady, mutable sign of the brainiac, wild brainiac sign of Gemini. It's going to go into the water sign of Cancer. And this is another transition that ends the month. Now, you could see the lineup here. This doesn't happen all the time. The amount of planetary changes, planetary ingresses that happen in the astrology world. And at a fundamental point too, because it's seasonal too. It happens during a month of a season change. And it happens with a heavy hitter with Pluto, a heavy hitter with Saturn that are kind of like probably generational types of transitions. And then you have Mercury, Venus, and Mars, which are like the players of change that are obvious to us, all happen within a month. Let's take a deep breath. You Cancers out there, you just have had Pluto in your world, a Capricorn outside your sign since 2008. You're actually going to have an interesting influx of energy with Mars being in there. Now, traditionally, people are going to say Mars doesn't flow well in Cancer. Traditionally, it doesn't. It doesn't feel so good there, move. But I think here with the transition that we're having this month, especially when we're dealing with a lot of mutable energy, and then major planetary outer body shifts that happen, I think on an emotional level, we have a purging process going on. And so I'll end the video saying this. And if I were to try to keep it like simple as possible, right? And I would say that we are mutating. Yes, some of this is happening during Pisces birthdays, a mutable sign. We have a season change happening. Many believe the beginning of the year happens at 0 Aries when the 0 birthdays happen, right? But there's more supporting this. For months now, we've had major planetary transits from eclipses to retrogrades, and a story coming out of a pandemic, culturally, everything. We know, and I know you can all feel it, that we're entering a new door as a world. And in my personal world or your personal world, you've had some visions and dreams and certain things you've wanted to put in place, or have you already started to put in place for the last 6 months. But here is where it really kicks in this month. There is no going back. When you have a planet like Pluto enter in a new sign, a planet like Saturn do this, just that enough will show you the changes happening. But when you have interplanetary bodies like Venus and Mars doing changes too at the same time, they just support the change, and it's much more tangible and much more in your face. The subconscious is conscious through the inner body planets. So when we get past March, we go into April, we go right into eclipse season, we go right into May with another eclipse, and then Jupiter enters in Taurus. So then we have another major planetary body that's going into a new sign for the next year. So this is it. You're never going back to the old reality. We have something new coming our way, but we have a struggle. And I'm going to get personal with my opinion here. This Pluto transit in Aquarius is going to test all of us. We just went through what it means, what authority and power means in the sign of Capricorn with Pluto being there. What we've become as a society, how our economic system has changed, how algorithms run our life. And this will be first and foremost in the front of our faces, especially it deals with how we deal with community and how we interact with each other on a collective level. I think there's some intense, actually, reality checks, and some of them harsh, of how we deal with each other in general, whether it's comment sections on the internet, whether it's the world and climate change, whether it's new technologies to help solve that, or because of technology, we have found ourselves in a worse off place with this. But how we deal collectively is the key here. And change, revolutions, and thought revolutions that actually happen in governments, all this stuff is going to be right there in front of us. And if you have the feeling like you want something new, that your heart is demanding something new, well, new's coming your way. Now, how new flows in your life and how it's going to work, is it intense? Is it easy? Whatever. It all depends on your chart. I just added some new sessions on my Sparkles of Gold website for readings. I just added a session today that deals with just how the Pluto transit is going to be in your chart. I have one just for Saturn, and I got my regular stuff. So that's what's up. I I'm going to be more honest on my videos coming up here about my personal opinions, because I've been kind of only doing it on my live streams, but I just don't care anymore. I'm going all out. I'm thinking about this Pluto and Aquarius transit, and I'm thinking, you know, I'm going to be straight up on a higher level. And whoever is along with the journey and ride, we can make something happen. We could change something. I think it's time. I think Spirit wants to break free. And in the end, with a Pluto and Aquarius transit, it's about one's individuation in the world and reclaiming that power for yourself. And then it is reflective in the world and in society. I appreciate you. And if you've never met me before or been here, please hit the subscribe channel, hit the like button, go to my website. And as I always say at the end, I'll see you on the next video.